My name is Pamela Z, and I'm a composer-performer. I am based in San Francisco, California, although I spend a lot of time in New York as well and travel quite a bit to give performances and do visiting artist residencies. And I make works mainly for voice and electronics, live electronic processing. Um, and I use gesture control instruments that allow me to manipulate sound and also image with physical gestures using various sensor-based instruments. And I also have, in more recent years, been composing a lot of works for chamber ensembles plus tape, as we still like to call it, or fixed media, or chamber ensembles including voice and electronics. And I have composed a lot of scores for dance companies, for choreographers to use in the pieces that they make on their dancers. And I've done a few independent film scores and as well as narration on some documentary films. So I have kind of a broad range of things I do. I don't have a big distinction between all of the terms that sort of mean that a person works in many different media or across disciplines. But culturally, those words are all loaded in different ways. And so I sometimes use the word intermedia because the word multimedia was, at a certain point, quite a long time ago now, was sort of co-opted by the computer industry. And whereas in the art world, multimedia used to refer to exactly what the name would indicate, which is that you have many different media involved in the work, which could be music, movement, visual art, writing, text, dramatic work. There's all kinds of different components that could be put together to make one kind of, to make one work. So people used to say multimedia, or mixed media, especially in the visual art world, they'd say mixed media, if you were combining different media. And then all of a sudden, the computer industry came along, and suddenly that word switched from meaning multiple media to meaning one medium. Because anytime somebody said multimedia, people assume that what that meant is that it's done on a computer, which is sort of an oxymoron, I think. So I sometimes have been known to avoid the word because I think that it indicates something else to different people. But to me, it's all the same. To me, it's just, I'm just looking for language to describe the fact that my work crosses many different types of media or disciplines in terms of what's involved in the work. And, I make installation works at times that involve sound and image and, objects that are placed in a space and have some kind of a presence and inhabiting the space in some way. So, well, I can't remember a time when I wasn't doing music. I've been singing and playing music all my life. My first public performance was as a 5-year-old in the talent show for my elementary school, singing and doing a little choreography that my sister and I came up with, and using, incidentally, these seed pods that fell out of the trees in the neighborhood we lived in. And when those would dry out, they made really nice maracas, and so we would use those. And so I laugh now when I look back and I think, gee, even when I was a little kid, I was using found objects in my work, and and all through my childhood, through elementary school, junior high school, I loved playing music I studied viola as a kid. I studied piano a little bit. I was always in the concert choir in high school or whatever the choir was. And I also played guitar since I think probably I was in the 5th or 6th grade, and wrote songs. And so I was sort of a singer-songwriter when I was a kid. The other thing that was interesting was when I was quite young, uh, the cassette tape deck was invented. And my father bought a cassette player for my sisters and I and sent it to us. And of course, it wound up in my room, and I was just playing with tape recorder all the time. And so then he sent us a second one, and I grabbed that one as well. And I figured out on my own like how to do multi-track recording by bouncing back tracks back and forth between these two cassette decks. And I was doing this when I was probably like, I don't know, in fifth or sixth grade. So I was already playing with machines even as a kid. But it wasn't until much later, after I grew up, I went to music school, was a voice major, studied classical voice, and by day was singing opera arias and art song. By night, I was playing in clubs and busking, doing, as sort of a singer-songwriter. And it wasn't until I got out of school, which was here, by the way, at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Although I don't know if this room that we're in existed at that time, but this college did, and I was studying here. But it wasn't until I got out of school and started doing, and I was just making a living playing music, and I also started doing radio. I had a radio program on KGNU, and I did the Tuesday afternoon Sound Alternative. I don't know if that show still exists, but I sort of got my experimental music education from the stacks of the radio station, where I was doing these radio shows and playing really diverse avant-garde music from all different genres and on my show. And I started playing with I actually started playing with digital delays. This would have been in the mid or early 1980s. I got my first digital delay. And that was the moment where I really feel like I found my voice as an artist, because I stopped playing the guitar very quickly after I started playing with the delays, and was doing, I figured out ways of making layers of my own voice in real time, and with live looping with digital delay, which live looping now is very common kind of garden variety way for musicians to work in this present day and time. But at the time that I sort of stumbled onto it, it was not being done by very many people. So it was eye-opening to me, because it really, I feel like it really kind of gave me permission to think about structuring my music around repetition and layers and slowly changing systems and things like that, which is something that was hard for me to discover when I was just singing and playing the guitar. I was using digital delays, hardware digital delays. And so the first one I had was made by Ibanez. It had 1 second, it was a rack mountable, like a 19-inch wide flat unit that had 1 second of delay. In those days, memory was extremely expensive. I mean, to me, it's just crazy now that we have these little flash drives that hold, 100 gigabytes or something on like something that you can't even see where the actual drive part is. It's just the USB connector that is all you can see. And in those days, you could buy hard drives that were bigger than, they were measured in megabytes, not in gigabytes. And the cost of memory, the SIMs that you would put into devices so that you could sample things digitally, the memory was just, it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars for just a few megabytes of memory. And so the first delay that I bought only had 1 second of delay. And I actually composed a lot of songs using just that 1 second delay. And then I quickly added a 4 second delay, and then I got another 4 second delay and an 8 second delay. And I eventually bought a delay made by Lexicon that it came with like, I want to say, maybe 14 seconds of delay, which to me was just like riches to get that much memory. And this would have been, probably the mid 80s by that time, mid to starting to be late 80s. And you could also purchase for probably several $100s a sim that you could install that would bring the memory up to 32 seconds of memory, which was like, whoa, And then it wasn't until many years later, so I was using hardware. I wasn't using the little stomp box digital delays because those had very low sampling rates and they didn't sound great. You could get away with it like with playing like a dirty guitar lick or something through it, but very good. So I needed to buy these higher end rack mountable delays that had what was considered to be at that time CD quality, so that the sampling rate was like 44.1 and 16-bit, which was at that time was extremely high end compared to these really, really low sampling rates on some of these other samplers. And so I was using those, and then I was patching. I had a whole rack, like a 6-space rack with like 4 delays and a sampler and multi-effects processor. And then I would carry all of that around, plus a Mackie mixer that had the same footprint as the rack that would sit on top. And the reason I carried such a big Mackie mixer was because the smaller ones didn't have faders, they all had knobs. And so to perform live, for me, it was really hard to use knobs. I wanted to be able to, I had like all my delay lines patched into the board, and they were all in a row. Like the first channel would be my voice, then it would be delay 1, delay 2, delay 3, delay 4, and so on. And so I needed to be able to just reach over while I'm performing without having to disengage from the performance, and just with my hand feel the state of those faders and be able to make adjustments without having to look and without having to do them one at a time with knobs. So I had to use the big, because the Mackie didn't make small mixers with faders, they only made big ones with faders. So it was a pretty hefty rig that I was carrying around. And it wasn't until the late 90s that I started porting all of that into Max MSP. And it took about 4 years to do it, but in the early 2000s, I started being able to carry just a laptop and some controllers and audio interface, and no more a rack full of hardware. And I didn't need to carry the mixing board either because I was doing all the mixing in Max. So when I was in school, I don't know what it's like now, but just to get through 4 years of music school to graduate in time, it required taking 21 credit hours a semester. And if you were majoring in voice or an instrument, a voice, or I should say voice or some other instrument, because they're all instruments, but you usually you were required to also be in some ensemble. And those ensembles would be like, they'd have 4 rehearsals a week and you'd get 1 credit hour. So it was like, it was like you just were basically wearing music school blinders the whole time. And so just to get through, and which I feel like in my case made it so that I maybe didn't explore as much as I wish I had. And I just went with the program, which was, singing classical music, bel canto, opera arias, and so on and so forth. And then taking, all the other whatever the courses that I was taking. And I didn't really discover, there were, the 20th century music was taught, but I didn't really discover the avenues and how I wanted to find my way into it until I got out of school. And the other thing that I didn't discover by being in school was how to actually just be a musician, and how to make a living as a musician. And so I just had to sort of make that up from scratch. But I feel like I owe part of it to my naivete, because I just went out into the world saying, I'm just going to do this, And I didn't allow myself to be concerned with, maybe it won't work. I just went ahead and did it. And I just learned a lot just through the actual doing of it. So I think that's kind of what life is. You have to learn how it works by doing it, you know, so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess just to be really open to what it is that you're interested in and to pursue that and to look into it and to get as much as you can from people who, you know, from the experiences of people who are doing the things that you want to be doing. Also, I would say, I mean, I don't know if this is limited to people in school or if it's just my advice in general to people who are interested in, who are in the arts or in music in some way, is to be really active in the community of people who are doing it. Do go be, you know, be supportive of other people, go to their gigs, go to people's, see other people's work, and then also do things yourself, make things happen. Don't just sort of say, oh, I wish that I was playing all these concerts or doing all these things. If they're not making themselves available to you, then make your own. Like just, you know, that's one of the things that I did when I first moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, which was another really big step in my sort of finding my way as an artist. I moved into a town that had a really exciting contemporary music and performance art scene. And I just jumped in with both feet and I tried to go to everybody's things and see everything and get to know the work of other people. But I also tried to perform as much as I could and get my work seen. Um, and I also really wanted to mix it up and wanted to make sure that, because people seem to be in these little narrow avenues where they choose, it's the chamber music people who only go to chamber music stuff, or the tinkerers who like build instruments and make things and they only go to like maker kind of things, and then they, you know, or whatever, the improvisers who only go to like free jazz concerts or improvised concerts. And so, you know, and also filmmakers who go to film things and poets who just go to poetry things. And so when I got to San Francisco, I was really interested in seeing all of those things combined. So in the service of that, I started putting on events and I started creating these events, these shows that were called Z programs. And they were kind of like avant variety shows where I would get like 10 or 12 artists all on a show, but instead of having them all do separate sets, and you know, I would go to these shows at clubs that went on into the wee hours of the night, and it would always be like people would be asking their friend, when are you on? I'll show up then, you know. And so I didn't want to allow that to happen. So what I would do is I would go into like a performance gallery or a theater space or a warehouse space, and I would put a show on. They would have all these different people in it, and I would ask them to play individual short pieces, and I would make sure that if there was an intermission, that everybody in it was on at least once during both sides of intermission, and that people, if they wanted to see their friend, they would have to sit through all the other things as well.